Hey guys, tonight we wander slowly into a world where the forests stretch without end, and the rivers glide as if they carry the secrets of time itself. You lean back, letting your shoulders soften, and imagine paths once walked by countless feet. The scene is calm, and the idea of ancient trade becomes less about transactions and more about timeless conversations. People often think history is full of drama, but here the pace is gentle, and the air feels almost still. Honestly, if excitement were oxygen, you probably would not survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I also invite you to drop a comment telling me your location and local time. I love knowing where and when you listen. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto quiet ground, the path beneath your feet faint and worn not by heavy traffic, but by steady repetition. Each footprint belongs to someone moving with patience, never in haste. Nothing here hurries, not even thought. The air carries the fragrance of moss, damp bark, and the faint spice of pine needles crushed underfoot. If history had a scent, perhaps it would be this. The breeze slides by with whispers softer than a library. Silence here feels less like gold and more like bronze warm, smooth, and beautifully tarnished. Gradually, you notice how the trails form invisible webs, threading the land like quiet veins. Each one connects villages, tribes, and gathering places. You picture small groups moving together, baskets balanced, tools in hand, and songs rising like companions on the road. These were not the grand caravans of distant continents, but humble lines of footsteps, carving memory into soil. Some historians believe the first trails were traced by animals. Deer may have been the earliest architects of trade, though they never asked for royalties. Over time, humans shaped those tracks into lasting routes, giving them power to carry not just goods but ideas. Before maps, rivers acted as the first reliable guides. Flowing water knew no borders, and anyone who tried to argue with one ended up wet. Imagine a river at dusk, the sky painted gray-blue, a canoe drifting by. A paddle dips with quiet regularity, ripples spreading outward in rhythm. In a way, paddling was the first metronome, keeping time long before instruments were made. Later, the Mississippi became known as the great spine of trade. But centuries earlier, countless smaller rivers carried life between settlements. Archaeological finds reveal copper from the north, reaching villages far to the south, long before anyone recorded ledgers. The rivers themselves became silent accountants, balancing the flow of goods without numbers. As you walk along the trail, you notice these networks were never built with stone or marked with signs. They lived in memory, carried by stories and gestures, shaped by the land itself. Trees leaned near crossings, rocks became markers, and the open sky told people when to move. A modern GPS would panic here, but memory and observation worked perfectly. The calmness of these exchanges reveals something deeper. Trade was never only about survival, though survival mattered. It was about weaving cultures together, bonds lasting longer than lifetimes. You may forget where you left your keys, but entire tribes remembered roots across centuries. One detail that often surprises people is how shells traveled inland. Long before trains or trucks, shells from the Gulf turned up in Ohio. They did not walk there themselves unless snails had secret ambitions. Instead, they passed hand to hand, like polite guests making their way across a never-ending dinner party. The ground itself feels like a quiet companion, stretched out like a soft rug across the continent. Step after step, movement followed patience instead of speed. A day meant a few miles, and that was enough. You think about how different that is from modern life, where buzzing notifications dictate time. The beauty of these pathways lies in their invisibility. You could wander through a forest today and never know that generations once carried copper, shells, and woven baskets along the same stretch. Nothing paved remains, only the memory of movement, as though the earth chose to keep the secret. Picture travelers wrapped in woven fibers, their belongings balanced with care. Children might follow, carrying light loads or simply questions. These routes were not highways, but long family walks stretched across miles. And yes, complaints were included, proof history already knew about road trips. You pause to consider that these trails carried more than objects. They carried languages, songs, and even jokes. Picture someone from the north learning a riddle in the south and bringing it home. The earliest cultural exports were not only copper or obsidian, but laughter and stories. History often forgets humor, yet it was always present, tucked quietly between solemn exchanges. The forest canopy softens the light, letting it fall like honey slipping from a spoon. Time itself seems to stretch, unhurried. Birds call overhead, their voices blending so gently they feel part of the silence. If ancient trade routes had a soundtrack, it would be this quiet weaving of wings and leaves. Later history remembers the rise of Cahokia, but long before its mounds, the land already hummed with exchange. Villages thrived by leaning on one another. Food, stone, and tools traveled across miles, not through noisy markets, but through conversations whispered into the landscape itself. One detail less known is the journey of obsidian. This volcanic glass traveled astonishing distances, found far from any volcano. It was carried carefully across plains and rivers, treasured in every hand. Someone once joked obsidian had more frequent flyer miles than many modern travelers. The humor is light, but the truth reveals a network far deeper than most imagine. Listening to this calm story, you sense that trade was never about conquest or domination. It was about continuity. A piece of copper shaped in one village might glow in a necklace worn hundreds of miles away, linking people who never met. You take a slow breath, letting the image of these pathways settle. The journey has only just begun, moving with a rhythm as steady as your own breathing. You picture yourself standing at the edge of a broad river, the water moving with a rhythm that feels older than memory itself. The surface shimmers in muted light, and you notice how it reflects not only the sky, but also the quiet patience of the land. You imagine the river as a road, only softer and without the traffic jams. Canoes glide slowly, carved from single trunks of trees. Each paddle stroke slips into the water without rush, leaving ripples that spread wider than the canoe itself. You can almost hear the hush of water folding back into itself. If you ever doubted history could be relaxing, here is your proof. The Mississippi stands as one of the most enduring highways of the past. Long before bridges or engines, its currents carried goods and ideas from far-off places. Archaeologists discovered copper mined near the Great Lakes, reaching communities hundreds of miles downstream. It was as if the river became a silent delivery service with no late fees. Imagine a trader lowering baskets of goods carefully into the canoe. The items might include animal hides, clay pots, or bundles of dried food. Balance was everything, since one misplaced bundle could send the whole enterprise swimming. It was an early lesson in logistics, though nobody called it that. The river did not need signs or milestones. Its bends and currents guided travelers the way a quiet voice guides you toward rest. Unlike roads that can crumble, the water kept its form, forever renewed by rain and snowmelt. You realize this was not just a path, but a breathing companion. A curious fact often mentioned is how rivers shaped settlement patterns. Villages sprang up along the banks, not only for food and water, but also for their role as trade stations. Imagine neighbors stopping by, not for sugar or salt, but for obsidian, shells, or bundles of herbs. The soundscape was gentle. Birds dipped low, fish stirred near the surface, and human voices blended with the lapping water. Transactions happened quietly, sometimes sealed with shared meals rather than contracts. You may think of paperwork today, but back then, trust was measured in stories and handshakes. Even without written maps, people remembered each curve and crossing. Oral traditions described safe passages and tricky eddies. Knowledge was passed like heirlooms, carefully polished by generations. If someone forgot a detail, it could mean getting stuck in a sandbar, which is probably the ancient version of lost signal. One recorded historical detail shows that by the time European explorers arrived, they marveled at the network of river trade already in place. It had existed for centuries, quietly binding communities. The explorers thought they had discovered something new, but in reality, they had only tuned in late. Another surprising fact is the presence of freshwater pearls in early trade. They were small, irregular, and carried from rivers to villages far away. These pearls never appeared in royal crowns, but they shimmered in the dim light of fires, a modest beauty valued in its own right. As you drift further along this imagined canoe, you sense how rivers created not just commerce, but calm connections. When two groups met on a riverbank, they did not need words immediately. The shared act of floating on the same current was introduction enough. Silence sometimes spoke louder than speech. The Mississippi was not alone. The Ohio, Missouri, and countless smaller rivers worked like branching hallways of an ancient house. Each led to another room, and together they formed a structure without walls. You might even say the rivers were the first open concept design. Night journeys also occurred, guided by moonlight reflected on water. The glow turned the river into a path of silver, wide enough to reassure, but narrow enough to require care. Traders carried fireflies in jars for extra light, though the fireflies never signed up for this job. Some historians still debate whether these river exchanges were mainly about economic necessity or cultural gatherings. Perhaps it was both, blending the need for resources with the joy of connection. To argue about it today feels like choosing between coffee and tea. Both offer comfort, only in different cups. Along the banks, evidence of clay pipes, stone blades, and ornaments has been found. These artifacts tell of conversations long gone, exchanges as gentle as the ripples that carried them. You wonder if the people laughed during these trades, and it seems certain they did. Even commerce benefits from humor. Imagine the weight of copper glinting in sunlight, loaded onto a canoe. It traveled from northern mines to villages far south, sometimes polished into tools, sometimes into jewelry. The journey was long, but the water never hurried. Copper had patience, and so did the people who carried it. You notice how the river does more than move goods. It sets a rhythm for life itself. Fishing, cooking, and storytelling all aligned with its flow. Children played on its banks, while elders remembered past floods and calm summers. Trade, then, was part of a larger relationship, one of respect and rhythm. An unusual detail rarely mentioned is the role of driftwood. Large pieces collected along the shore often served as markers or even makeshift docks. Some travelers believed driftwood carried spirits from faraway places, though others probably just saw it as free furniture. Both views were practical in their own way. You take another slow breath as the canoe drifts gently forward. The trade of shells, copper, pearls, and pottery continues in your mind. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced. The river is not a race, but a gentle reminder that movement can be both purposeful and calm. By now, the journey feels less like history and more like meditation. You hear the current flowing steadily, as if whispering that everything finds its place in time. The ancient traders knew this truth, carrying goods with patience, trusting the water to guide them where they needed to be. You close the image of this part of the journey with the canoe gliding softly into evening light. The river reflects the last glow of the sky, and you feel at peace knowing that even centuries ago, people found connection by simply floating together. History flows like water, and tonight it flows you gently toward rest. You step from the quiet riverbank into the embrace of the forest. The trees stand tall, their trunks like patient columns holding up a ceiling of leaves. The ground beneath you is soft with needles and moss, the air scented with damp earth. Every breath feels like it carries centuries. The forest trails are narrow, sometimes little more than pressed grass or a faint line of disturbed soil. They wind between oaks, pines, and birches, curving gently as if trees were whispering directions to travelers. The path is not straight, yet it knows exactly where it is going. Imagine hunters and gatherers moving along these trails. Their pace is unhurried, their steps steady. They carry baskets woven from reeds, tools carved from stone, and perhaps dry berries wrapped in hides. Each step is measured, almost ceremonial, as though the ground itself deserves respect. The light filters through branches in patches, creating a dance of shadow and sun. Birds sing softly overhead, while insects hum in steady background tones. If this trail were a playlist, it would be the world's first nature mix. It might even have fewer ads than modern ones. Archaeological evidence shows that shells from the Gulf of Mexico traveled deep inland. They reached communities far from the shore, discovered in settlements in the heartland of North America. The presence of these shells tells us the trails connected ocean to forest in a seamless exchange. The curious part is that the exact paths remain unknown. Scholars know the shells existed far from their origin, but the forest swallowed the footprints. The trees, always patient, erased the trails, leaving behind only the quiet suggestion of movement. History sometimes prefers to keep a little mystery. You picture groups pausing at clearings, sharing food, exchanging small objects, or telling stories. The forest itself becomes part of the conversation. Its silence listens. Its stillness encourages reflection. Every gathering feels like a meeting not only of people but of landscapes. At times, the trails lead upward, over ridges and hills, before dipping into valleys where streams run. Travelers would stop to drink, resting in the shade. They might notice plants growing nearby, useful herbs, berries, or simply flowers to brighten the journey. Even ancient trade routes allowed for snack breaks. The evidence of flint tools scattered across regions suggests these forest trails were not only for trade, but also for sharing resources of knowledge. Flint from one place appeared far away, shaped into blades or arrowheads. The trails were not only physical, but intellectual highways. As you walk deeper into the imagined forest, you sense how the trees themselves formed walls, giving structure without confinement. The canopy above created a shelter from harsh sun and sudden rain. Travelers moved with the rhythm of the seasons, trusting the forest to guide their steps. A small, lesser-known fact is that nuts, acorns, hickories, and chestnuts were also exchanged along these paths. They were portable, durable, and nutritious. You could say they were the original trail mix, although nobody had invented chocolate chips to go with them. The trails stretched for miles, linking communities separated by landscapes, but connected by purpose. Each step reinforced the bond between villages, and each meeting along the way reinforced trust. You sensed that the rhythm of walking itself was part of the story. Children likely followed behind, playing games as they walked. Their laughter may have echoed under the branches, while adults carried the weight of goods and responsibilities. In this way, the trail became both a classroom and a marketplace, teaching life while supporting survival. When archaeologists uncover shells or copper ornaments inland, they recognize not just an object, but a journey. Every artifact holds a story of hands passing it, steps carrying it, and forests guiding it. It is less about the object itself, and more about the movement it represents. The forest trails were never truly empty. Deer, elk, and smaller creatures passed along them first, carving the way through undergrowth. Humans followed, letting the instincts of animals guide their steps. In a sense, the deer became the earliest pathfinders, silent travel agents who shaped the first lines of movement across the wilderness. Some historians still wonder whether these exchanges were formal agreements or simply casual interactions. Perhaps both were true, depending on the season and the group. The truth rests somewhere between structured trade and friendly visits. Debates continue, though none of them disturb the forest's silence. You imagine walking on one of these trails at dusk. The air cools, the shadows stretch long, and the path narrows into the distance. Each step feels like a meditation, as though history itself encourages you to slow down. Even the crickets seem to sing in rhythm with your breath. In winter, the trails transformed. Snow covered the ground, softening footsteps into whispers. Travelers still moved, bundled in furs, carrying goods tucked carefully in woven packs. The white landscape reflected moonlight, turning the forest into a glowing corridor. It must have been both challenging and beautiful. An unusual but real detail is that certain stones carried for trade were sometimes painted or marked before exchange. The markings remain mysterious, their meanings unknown. They might have been identifiers, or perhaps they were just ancient doodles. Even in history, people may have sketched when bored. The forest does not hurry your thoughts. It allows them to wander, just like the trails. You realize that trade in these places was not driven by speed or volume, but by the gentle necessity of connection. To walk slowly, to carry goods carefully, was enough. As the journey continues in your imagination, you sense the press of countless footsteps that once touched this soil, now hidden beneath roots and fallen leaves. Though the trails themselves have faded, the connections they carried remain woven into artifacts, memories, and the quiet persistence of history. The path narrows, bending into deeper woods. The air thickens with stillness, and you hear the faint hush of leaves brushing one another, like pages of an ancient book turning slowly. Every sound feels like a reminder that the story is not finished. It has simply paused, waiting for patience and presence. With each breath, you step forward, guided by echoes of those who walked long before, their rhythm steady, their memory etched softly into the earth. You step from the quiet forest into a landscape of vast, shimmering water. The great lakes spread out before you, their surfaces so wide that they seem to merge with the sky. The horizon feels endless, as though the earth itself decided to pause and breathe. The lakes do not rush like rivers. They sit, waiting, reflecting the clouds above. Their calm waters allowed canoes to glide across like silent skaters. Traders trusted these waters, even when the weather tested their patience. Every paddle stroke echoed with both risk and reward. Archaeological evidence shows copper from Lake Superior traveling southward. Nuggets were mined, shaped, and polished into tools and ornaments. These gleaming pieces appeared hundreds of miles away, linking northern miners with southern artisans. It is proof that patience and calm can carry even heavy metal quite far. Obsidian, too, made its way into these networks. Though volcanic glass came from distant regions, fragments have been found around the lakes. The distance it traveled makes you wonder, who carried such fragile material, and how did they keep it safe? Maybe they invented bubble wrap, only made of moss. The shorelines became gathering points. Villages sat along the edges, their fires flickering in the night. Smoke rose above the trees, marking places where exchange and conversation flowed. The calm waters reflected not just stars, but the glow of communities thriving on connection. Some historians still debate whether the great seasonal gatherings here were primarily religious ceremonies or market meetings. Were people worshiping, trading, or perhaps blending the two without seeing a distinction? To argue about it centuries later feels like trying to separate tea leaves from water. The gatherings likely included feasts. Fish roasted on open fires, berries shared, and nuts cracked with laughter. Goods moved hand to hand, but so did songs. A necklace may have been exchanged for pottery, yet the real value came in the friendships formed along the lakes. You imagine canoes lined up, their prows resting on smooth stones. Traders stepped onto the shore, stretching after long paddles. They greeted familiar faces and strangers alike, finding comfort in the rhythm of recurring meetings. Even ancient commerce had the vibe of a neighborhood reunion. Artifacts found around the Great Lakes include shell beads, pottery shards, and carved ornaments. Each one is a whisper of voices long gone, reminders that goods traveled farther than footsteps could count. The lakes acted as wide mirrors reflecting centuries of quiet collaboration. A detail often overlooked is how some copper was not used for blades or points, but hammered into thin sheets, then shaped into symbols. Many took the form of fish or birds, though their meaning remains uncertain. Perhaps they were ornaments, perhaps messages, or perhaps something we cannot yet name. Whatever their purpose, they remind us that even practical tools sometimes carried beauty, yet beauty shared the stage with challenge. The calm surface of the lakes often concealed sudden storms. Winds could rise without warning, rolling waves higher than a canoe could bear. When that happened, travelers pulled their boats ashore and waited. Hours became days, with patience not as a choice but as survival. Still, you can almost hear one weary voice muttering about the delay, proving history always included complaints. You can almost hear the conversations. A trader from the north explains the qualities of copper. Another from the south offers pottery with intricate designs. The dialogue unfolds with gestures, smiles, and pauses. Language barriers mattered less than the simple act of giving and receiving. Imagine a summer evening on the lakeshore. The sun dips low, coloring the water in soft gold. Canoes rest in silence, while people gather around fires. Drums pulse gently, voices rise in song, and the trade becomes inseparable from celebration. The scene is both history and lullaby. Scholars note that obsidian and copper appeared together in some sites, hinting at wide-reaching networks. How did such fragile glass survive long journeys without breaking? Perhaps wrapped in furs, cushioned like fragile eggs. Or maybe people were simply careful, proving once again that gentleness is stronger than haste. Alongside goods, ideas traveled. Designs on pottery revealed influences from faraway communities. Patterns repeated across vast distances, suggesting not only trade of objects, but also of imagination. The lakes became printing presses without ink, publishing designs across the continent through hands and clay. The nights along the lakes must have been magical. Moonlight danced on waves, fires flickered on the shore, and voices carried across the still air. Traders may have looked up, realizing they shared not just goods, but also the same stars. That, too, was a form of connection. One unusual discovery is that mica, a shiny mineral, also appeared in these networks. Thin sheets of mica reflect light beautifully, almost like mirrors. Some pieces were cut into shapes, perhaps used in ceremonies. You could imagine ancient people using them like disco balls for quiet spiritual dances. The calm of the Great Lakes is not silence, but fullness. Waves lap gently, birds skim across the surface, and conversations ripple in harmony. Trade here was not about conquest or urgency, but about balance. Everything moved with a rhythm too steady to disturb. You picture yourself seated on a smooth stone at the water's edge, listening as traders speak in low, measured tones. Around you, canoes glide across the surface, their paddles dipping in unison. They carry copper from the north, obsidian from distant lands, shells from faraway coasts, and pottery shaped by careful hands. Each vessel feels like part of an endless tide goods, and stories rising and falling in rhythm, always moving, yet never rushed. As night settles deeper, the shoreline glows with the fading embers of fire. The air grows cooler, and voices soften before disappearing altogether. One by one, people step into shelters, leaving the lakes quiet again. What remains is a memory, carried like the last strands of smoke that drift upward and fade among the stars. The Great Lakes endure, vast and calm, holding the echoes of these gatherings. Their waters still stretch wide, their horizons still blur into sky. The trade itself has passed into history, but the stillness lingers. It feels like an invitation, an urging to pause, to imagine connections once carried gently across these silent highways of water. You walk into a village where the air smells faintly of clay and smoke. The ground is scattered with fibers, reeds, and shards of pottery. The scene is quiet, almost tender, as people sit in circles, shaping with patience and care. The work feels less like labor and more like meditation. Basket making begins with gathering reeds and grasses. Each strand is sorted, soaked, and soft. You imagine fingers weaving them together, one crossing over another, until form appears. The process is slow, steady, and precise. It almost feels like time itself is being braided into shape. Nearby, clay is pressed and smoothed, fingers leaving prints that will later harden into permanence. Bowls, jars, and plates form from simple motions repeated endlessly. The potter spins or coils, adding water to ease the clay's resistance. You can hear the faint squish, the earth reshaped with soft determination. Archaeologists uncover pottery shards across many states, each bearing intricate patterns and delicate designs. These fragments reveal the community's shared techniques and artistic influences, passing ideas alongside goods. A jar crafted in one region often resembles those hundreds of miles away, as if creativity itself traveled on the same trails as shells, copper, and woven baskets. The consistency of these motifs puzzles researchers. How could groups so distant produce nearly identical patterns without direct instruction? Some suggest migration. Others point to trade as the main conduit. Perhaps styles spread like fashion, carried along with stories, laughter, and casual imitation. Even in ancient times, it seems likely someone grumbled about copycats, though always politely, of course. These shards remind us that trade was not only about survival or exchange of materials, but also about the sharing of culture, artistry, and subtle humor, quietly linking people across vast landscapes. A curious fact is that some pottery included crushed shells mixed into the clay. This tempered the vessels, preventing cracks when fired. What seems like simple cooking knowledge was in fact sophisticated material science. You could call it early chemistry, minus the safety goggles. You notice how basketry and pottery were not just practical but symbolic. A basket carried food, but it also carried care. A jar held water, but it also held memory. Each crafted object was both useful and beautiful, created not only for survival, but for joy. Some historians point out that designs on pottery may have been more than decoration. They could have represented stories, maps, or even shared identities. The repetition of spirals and zigzags hints at meanings beyond the surface. You may never decode them, but their beauty remains undeniable. Basketry often featured colors, achieved by dyeing reeds with natural pigments. Reds, browns, and blacks turned simple patterns into intricate art. Imagine the satisfaction of holding something woven not only for carrying, but also for delight. It is proof that ancient trade included aesthetics, not just necessities. A subtle but captivating detail is that some pottery pieces preserve fingerprints in the clay. Archaeologists sometimes press their own fingers against these impressions, feeling as if they are touching someone from centuries ago. It is history's quiet handshake, firm, yet tender, connecting past and present in a single moment. Basketry and pottery were often communal acts. Elders guided younger hands, teaching techniques slowly and patiently. Mistakes were never failures. They were lessons folded seamlessly back into the process. Each stitch or coil carried knowledge, memory, and care. Through this shared practice, craft became a living inheritance, passed down naturally from one generation to the next. Every object embodies a gentle continuity, a rhythm of learning and living, reminding us that even the smallest creations can link people across time, quietly preserving the stories of hands long gone. You imagine an evening where people gather after trade. Some repair baskets worn from long journeys. Others shape new jars, ready for the next exchange. The fire crackles, laughter drifts, and hands move with calm determination. Work and rest blur together in the rhythm of creation. These crafts traveled as much as copper or shells. A finely made basket could carry goods across long trails, and a jar could hold grain or salt, far from its place of origin. Objects were ambassadors of skill, quietly representing their makers in distant villages. One historical detail worth noting is the discovery of Hopewell pottery across a wide region, showing consistent styles. These pieces link communities separated by rivers and forests, proving that ideas spread as surely as materials. The potters were, in a sense, cultural messengers. The humor lies in imagining how fragile some pottery must have been on long journeys. Traders carried jars carefully, balancing them in baskets or padding them with fibers. If one broke, you can almost hear someone sigh, mutter a few words, and start planning another. In the dim light of the past, you picture a scene where baskets are stacked neatly, pottery lined along walls. The designs glow faintly in the firelight, their patterns moving like shadows. You sense that these objects are more than tools. They are the fingerprints of time itself. Some vessels contain seeds that survived centuries. Archaeologists discovered these seeds, sometimes even reviving them into new plants. It is as though the jars were not only containers of food, but guardians of life, waiting patiently. You could call them the world's first long-term storage units. The quiet patience of crafting reminds you that history is not only battles and monuments. It is also the soft weave of reeds, the slow shaping of clay, the care of hands. These moments rarely make headlines, but they carry the weight of daily life. As you linger in the village, you notice trade unfolding not just through objects, but through shared knowledge. A pattern taught here may resurface hundreds of miles away, subtly transformed by another hand. Creativity itself traveled alongside copper, shells, and stone, weaving connections invisible yet enduring. Fires burn lower, casting long, soft shadows. Baskets are finished, jars dry by the gentle heat. People settle back, listening to the forest beyond. You feel the same calm, sensing that trade is more than movement, it is also stillness. Each creation, each careful gesture, carries care and patience. The story of trade is written not only in what moves across the land, but in the quiet rhythm of hands shaping, teaching, and sustaining life. You step out of the forest into an open world where the horizon stretches so far, it feels like the sky leans down to meet it. The land rolls gently, covered in grasses that sway like a sea of green and gold. The sound is a constant hush, like whispers too soft to catch. The plains carry a quiet, unique stillness. Wind sweeps through tall grasses, bending stalks in slow, rolling waves. Each movement feels coordinated, as if the land itself rehearses a careful, endless dance. Walking here is both exposing and comforting, the world stretching infinitely, yet attentive to each step. Traders moved through these spaces with patience. With no rivers to guide them and few trees for shelter, they relied on stars, the sun, and memory. Each footstep pressed into soil that bore no permanent trail, yet the rhythm of walking created an invisible map. In early centuries, there were no horses. People carried goods on their backs or used simple travois pulled by dogs. Loads were modest: obsidian blades, shell ornaments, and copper tools. The pace was slow, but the plains did not mind. Time was measured in seasons, not hours. Later, horses arrived, transforming travel, yet before that, trade remained steady and quiet. You can imagine long lines of walkers, their shadows stretching across grass at sunset, humble, persistent, and human. Turquoise, originating far to the southwest, appears in these plains, a bright reminder of distant connections. Shells traveled inland from distant coasts, becoming beads and ornaments treasured for their shimmer. Holding one to the ear, someone might have imagined hearing an ocean many days away, a small marvel in a vast, quiet land. The plains offered their own goods in return. Bison hides, strong and durable, were traded widely. Meat preserved by drying traveled along with them, feeding communities far beyond the hunting grounds. You can almost smell the faint, smoky sweetness of dried meat tucked into woven packs. An obscure but fascinating fact is that prairie turnips' edible roots gathered by hand sometimes traveled as trade items. They were nutritious, lightweight, and storable. Think of them as the original pocket snacks, only less processed than modern granola bars. The land provided not just grandeur, but practicality. Walking through grass taller than your waist, you might lose sight of companions. Traders sometimes marked routes with cairns, small piles of stones rising above the green. These served as guides, memory markers left in a place where the wind erased footprints. At night, the plains opened into a dome of stars. Without trees or mountains, the sky stretched unbroken. Travelers followed constellations, letting the heavens act as compass. The Milky Way above must have felt like another trail, glowing quietly, pointing the way forward. Some historians still debate whether these vast plains were primarily transit corridors or gathering spaces in their own right. Were they simply crossed, or were they celebrated as meeting grounds? Perhaps both were true. The grasses may have carried not just footsteps, but also festivals. The soundscape was subtle. Wind hummed. Insects created a constant undertone. Birds occasionally cut the silence with calls that echoed for miles. Traders added their own voices, singing softly or telling stories to pass the time. Humor surely traveled with them, laughter rolling farther than the grass could reach. You can imagine a pause at midday. Travelers rest, laying down their burdens, stretching legs stiff from steady walking. The grass bends gently around them, offering both cushion and concealment. Someone produces dried berries, another shares a shell bead, and the exchange becomes part of rest itself. Artifacts uncovered in plain sites include obsidian, shells, and turquoise, proving that distant worlds met here. Each object is a guest in an unfamiliar landscape, a reminder that no place was truly isolated. The grass may look endless, but it was threaded with connection. A striking historical find is the discovery of effigy mounds near certain plains regions. These earthworks shaped like animals suggest gatherings where trade mixed with ceremony. To build such forms required cooperation and patience, perhaps fueled by goods exchanged and stories shared. The land itself became canvas. The humor of the plains lies in their deceptive sameness. Walk an hour, and the view looks the same. Walk a day, and still the horizon refuses to change. Traders must have joked about déjà vu, though they had no French word for it yet. Seasonal timing mattered deeply. Spring offered fresh grasses for animals. Autumn meant cooler air for walking. Summer heat could exhaust, and winter snow could blanket trails. The rhythm of trade aligned with the rhythm of nature, as though people tuned themselves to the land's quiet metronome. An unusual detail is that grass itself was sometimes traded, cut and dried as fodder for animals once horses appeared. It seems unremarkable, but it represents the adaptability of trade. Even something as ordinary as grass could become valuable when carried to another place. You sense how the plains taught humility. There were no tall mountains to climb, no rivers to paddle, only distance, patience, and wind. The journey itself was the lesson, reminding travelers that fastness is not conquered but respected. Each step became a quiet act of endurance. As dusk approaches, the grasses turn golden in fading light. Shadows stretch long, and the horizon glows faintly before dimming into night. Traders gather in small circles, fires flickering low. The flames bend in the wind, just as the grasses do, everything moving in harmony. You picture the laughter of travelers as they settle in. Stories are shared, some about past journeys, others about imagined adventures. Someone jokes that the grass is whispering secrets, though no one can quite make out the words. Perhaps history itself is speaking softly, only half understood. The plains return to silence as night deepens. The stars rise, countless and unwavering. Traders sleep with the sound of wind as lullaby, knowing tomorrow the path will be long again. The grasses sway above them, like guardians, whispering endlessly across centuries. The plains remain today, their horizons still wide, their winds still restless. The trade is gone, but the whispers endure. If you listen closely, you might still hear the echoes of footsteps, the soft murmur of exchange, and the laughter of travelers who once walked through seas of grass. You walk slowly toward the southern coastline, where air grows damp with salt and breezes carry the scent of tides. The land feels different here, softer underfoot, more generous with rivers and estuaries. The hum of insects blends with the murmur of waves meeting shore. Trade in these regions had a rhythm tied to water. Canoes skimmed along calm bays, their paddles dipping with gentle precision. The coast offered abundant fish, oysters, and salt, all of which became staples in exchange. Salt especially, being precious for preservation, moved inland like silent treasure. One historical note often shared is that salt-making along the Gulf Coast became a significant activity. Communities boiled seawater or gathered salt from marshes, producing crystals that glittered in the sun. You imagine traders holding these small piles, aware of their quiet value. Stone tools, by contrast, traveled toward the coast. Hammers, scrapers, and finely made arrowheads moved in exchange for salt and fish. The balance of trade resembled a gentle conversation, each side offering what they had, receiving what they lacked, with no written contracts, only trust and memory. You imagine gatherings along sandy inlets, bustling yet unhurried. People share roasted fish, exchange tools and ornaments, and tell stories that rise and fall with the tide. Laughter drifts across tidal pools, mingling with the calls of gulls and pelicans, who occasionally swipe unattended scraps, proof that nature never fully respects human arrangements. The coastline itself carries traces of distant lands. Archaeologists uncover copper artifacts and shell beads etched with designs reminiscent of cultures far to the south. Occasionally, symbols originating in Mesoamerica appear, surprising scholars and sparking quiet curiosity. How these images traveled north remains a gentle mystery, as though the coast itself whispers the story of their journey. In these slow exchanges, trade is less about urgency and more about connection. Objects move, yes, but so do ideas, stories, and songs, linking people across vast distances with subtle patience. Even a stolen fish becomes part of the narrative. An obscure but fascinating detail is the presence of shark teeth in burial sites far inland. These were not merely souvenirs. They held symbolic value. Imagine explaining to someone who never saw the ocean that this serrated shape once belonged to a predator that ruled waters beyond the horizon. Salt itself became more than seasoning. It was a preservative, enabling dried fish and meat to last through lean months. Traders may have carried bundles of salted food hundreds of miles, spreading not just nutrition, but a taste of the sea across prairies and forests. The coast also provided shells that were carved into gorgeous ornamental discs, often decorated with spirals or bird figures. These gorgets reached deep into the continent, found in places like the Ohio Valley. Each one carried a piece of southern shoreline into a new landscape, blending art with memory. Some historians still debate whether these shell carvings primarily carried religious meaning or were simply fashion. Were they sacred emblems or stylish accessories? Perhaps both, depending on the wearer. Either way, they shimmered faintly in the firelight, holding echoes of waves even when far from the shore. Daily life along the coast moved with the tides. Traders timed their journeys to the gentle rise and fall of water. Low tide revealed oyster beds ready for harvest, while high tide opened smooth canoe routes. The sea itself became a quiet partner in trade, offering schedules that demanded patience, attention, and respect. A small, humorous challenge accompanied these routines: sand. It crept everywhere, slipping into packs, nesting in seams, clinging to food, and embedding itself stubbornly in clothing. Traders likely spent hours shaking it out, only to find it returned, as if the coastline had its own private joke. Even amid the serious work of exchanging goods and maintaining connections, life along the coast reminded travelers that the natural world had subtle humor, teaching patience and humility with every grain of sand. Ceremonial mounds existed here too. The coastal Mississippian cultures built impressive earthworks where gatherings occurred. Goods changed hands alongside rituals and dances. These spaces connected inland and coastal worlds, showing that trade was never separate from community life, but woven tightly into it. One historical event often highlighted is the rise of coastal trade hubs during the Mississippian period, particularly around what is now Florida and the Gulf states. These hubs gathered inland travelers, offering fish, salt, and shells in return for stone, copper, and stories. They thrived for centuries. The echoes of these hubs extended inland. Archaeologists have uncovered shell beads and pendants hundreds of miles away, tangible evidence of relationships that stretched across ecosystems. The coastline was not an ending, but a beginning, sending goods outward like waves that never stopped rolling. An odd and lesser-known fact is that stingray spines sometimes traveled as trade goods. These sharp barbs, naturally shed, could serve as tools or symbolic objects. The idea of carrying part of a stingray far from the sea must have seemed curious, but curiosity itself fueled connection. Even the act of drying fish carried its own rhythm. Racks of fish hung in open air, smoke curling gently around them. This process provided trade goods that were both practical and aromatic. Travelers may have joked that they smelled like the ocean long before they reached the coast. The southern climate allowed year-round gatherings, unlike northern regions where winter pressed hard. This continuity made the coast a steady hub of exchange. Goods did not wait for thaw. They flowed as regularly as tides, weaving constant threads through the fabric of trade networks. You imagine the coastline at night. Fires glow softly against dark waters, sparks rising like tiny stars. The steady rhythm of waves becomes quiet background music, soothing and calm. Traders speak in low tones, letting the sea carry their words, for silence itself seems full of conversation. Today, the coastline remains changed, yet eternal. Salt glints on rocks, fish flash through shallow waters, and shells gleam underfoot. The memory of trade lingers subtly, like a gentle echo across time. Goods once carried by hands traveled farther than anyone could have imagined, leaving traces in both objects and stories. Even now, the coast seems to whisper these histories, inviting imagination and patience. It connects past and present through tides, wind, and the quiet pulse of life along the water, a timeless reminder of gentle movement and enduring connection. You step into a land of sun and silence, where wide skies stretch without interruption, and the earth glows with shades of red, orange, and soft brown. The desert unfolds like a painting, vast and uncluttered, a canvas where every footprint feels both small and lasting. The air is dry, carrying warmth even in the evening. Your footsteps crunch against gravel, and each stone seems to echo more than it should. The desert makes you aware of your own sound, your own presence, because silence here is more than absence. It is its own character. The Southwest held networks as alive as any river valley. Communities lived in adobe dwellings and pueblos, stacked like honeycombs against cliffs and mesas. These homes stood sturdy against time, like patient watchers over trade routes that cut across desert landscapes, marked by memory and stars. One of the most surprising details is the presence of parrot feathers in pueblo sites. Bright and shimmering, these feathers came from far south in tropical regions. Imagine walking through hot desert trails with a bundle of dazzling feathers that once belonged to birds shouting in rainforests. How did they arrive here? The journey would have been long and harsh. Caravans of traders carried them carefully, crossing plains, rivers, and deserts. Historians still wonder at the organization it required. Parrots certainly never volunteered to fly across hundreds of miles of dry land. The desert itself offered its own goods. Turquoise, mined from veins in arid hills, glowed with deep blue-green. These stones traveled far, becoming beads and amulets. When worn, turquoise seemed to carry the desert's quiet sky into distant forests and valleys, a portable piece of sun and silence. Pottery also flourished here. The Pueblo people created vessels painted with geometric patterns, each design echoing balance and symmetry. These pots carried corn, beans, and seeds, but they also carried culture. To receive such a pot was to receive not only food, but also a story shaped in clay. An obscure but intriguing fact is that macaws, not just their feathers, were once kept in Pueblo communities. Archaeological finds reveal the remains of birds far from their native lands. Imagine the bright squawk of a tropical parrot breaking into the still desert air, a sound both exotic and startling. Trade routes through the Southwest were not highways, but threads across harsh land. Travelers rested near springs and canyons, where water collected in hidden places. These oases became gathering spots, their presence known to those who memorized landmarks and passed knowledge carefully from one generation to the next. The desert demanded respect. Journeys had to be timed with seasons, avoiding the searing heat of midsummer or the bitter chill of desert nights. The rhythm of movement was not fast. It was slow, careful, like walking in step with the land itself, never rushing against its patience. Some historians still debate whether parrot feathers held purely ceremonial value, or whether they also carried political meaning. Were they symbols of distant alliances, tokens of power, or simple luxuries? The truth may have shifted with context, as brightly as the feathers themselves shifted in light. The land offered other curiosities. Obsidian, sharp and glassy, came from volcanic origins scattered across the Southwest. To hold a flake of obsidian was to hold cooled fire. These pieces traveled widely, used as blades and points, their edges sharper than steel, carrying desert fire into distant forests. You can picture a caravan resting at dusk. Travelers set down woven baskets, unwrapped bundles of feathers, turquoise, and food. A fire is lit, sparks rising into the dark. The desert cools quickly, and blankets are pulled tight. Jokes are told about sand finding its way into every meal. One historical event often mentioned is the rise of Chaco Canyon as a hub of trade and ceremony around 1,000 years ago. Its great houses, with hundreds of rooms, became centers where goods from all directions converged. Turquoise, shells, feathers, and more. The canyon was a desert crossroads. The architecture of Chaco still amazes scholars. Buildings aligned with celestial events, their walls catching light at solstices. Trade here was not only economic, but cosmic. Goods were exchanged under skies that seemed to guide both time and meaning, binding earth and heaven in shared rhythm. A curious discovery shows that cacao residues appear in vessels from the Southwest. Cacao, the source of chocolate, originated far to the south in Mesoamerica. Imagining chocolate traveling across deserts brings a quiet smile. Even in ancient times, people carried treats far beyond what one might expect, weaving a little sweetness into long, patient journeys. Desert nights, though chilly, offered their own beauty. Stars spread across the sky with remarkable clarity, forming constellations that guided travelers. Traders likely used them not just for navigation, but for stories, speaking softly to one another about the shapes above. Perhaps someone imagined a bright parrot attempting to perch on a star, mistaking the glowing points for branches. These gentle images remind you that trade was not only about objects, it carried stories, humor, and small joys. Even in the stillness of deserts and under the vast night sky, people found connection, laughter, and a sense of wonder woven into the slow rhythm of life. Daytime brought heat, yet traders persisted. Wide hats or woven cloths shielded them from the sun. Paths were remembered by rock formations, by the way certain cliffs leaned, or how distant mountains pointed like fingers. The land itself became a map, written not with ink, but with stone. You pause to listen. The desert is never truly silent. Wind hisses through canyons. Small lizards dart over sand, their feet barely leaving marks. A raven calls overhead, its voice echoing against cliffs. The desert speaks in small ways, reminding travelers they are never entirely alone. At the end of a long day, goods exchanged, fires glowing, traders might have reflected on their journeys. Each feather, bead, or pot represented countless steps. The desert did not make trade easy, but it made it meaningful. To carry beauty across difficulty gave it even greater value. The desert remains today, wide and patient. Ruins stand in quiet valleys. Turquoise still lies hidden in stone, and parrots now live only in memory here. Yet the echoes of pathways endure. Walk softly, and you might still hear traders' footsteps, carrying color across a sea of sand. You step into a clearing where night has already draped the world in its dark, soft blanket. A circle of firelight flickers, painting warm shapes on the faces gathered close. Sparks rise like tiny stars, drifting upward until they vanish into the vast dome of sky. The air feels alive with anticipation, carrying the subtle fragrance of smoke, pine, and damp earth. You inhale slowly, letting the calm settle around your shoulders. Soft voices drift through the cool evening, mingling with the steady crackle of flames. One person hums, another joins, and a quiet song flows among the group, gentle, deliberate, filling the silence without overwhelming it. Ceremonial gatherings were as much about presence as exchange. Objects passed from hand to hand, pots, shells, feathers, but they were more than tools or goods. Each carried meaning, connecting people through touch, sight, and shared attention. Chokia, near the Mississippi River, became a central hub for such gatherings over 1,000 years ago. At its peak, it held tens of thousands of people, surpassing many European cities of the same period. Trade and ceremony intertwined beneath the watchful forms of massive earthen mounds. Imagine the grand plaza alive at night, fires scattered across open spaces, visitors arriving from distant lands, goods laid out with quiet abundance. Copper glimmers in the flames. Shell beads catch and scatter light. The soft pulse of drums underlies the gentle murmur of conversation, steady like a heartbeat. Historians still debate the reasons for Cahokia's decline: climate change, political tension, or shifting trade routes. Yet even in its fading, the site speaks of far-reaching networks. An obscure but telling detail is the black drink, a caffeinated holly leaf beverage. Imagine sipping its bitter warmth under moonlight, staying awake through long ceremonies where ritual and presence blended seamlessly. Around the fires, objects were exchanged with ceremony intact. A shell gorget offered in trade might also carry blessing. Feathers bundled in reverence passed from hand to hand. Nothing was purely transactional. Everything bore the weight of shared intention. You feel the night air on your skin, voices rising. In chant, flames dancing and casting swaying shadows across packed earth. A child wanders too close, laughter ripples, and they are gently scooped up. Humor lived even in ritual. Some gatherings included dance. Feet pressed patterns into the soil, circles widening and closing, steps repeated in careful rhythm. The earth itself became part of the ceremony, holding memories of both celebration and trade. Tomorrow, these impressions might vanish, yet tonight they pulse with meaning. Artifacts recovered from Cahokia reveal copper plates etched with birds, suns, and geometric patterns. Receiving one was not merely about metal. It was a connection to something larger, woven across landscapes, linking hands, eyes, and lives. Together, Cahokia's reach was vast. Goods from the Gulf Coast, Great Lakes, and beyond appeared there. The city functioned less as a fortress and more as a gathering harp ritual, commerce, and social exchange coexisting. Imagine the hum of so many together. Layered chatter, muted laughter, songs, footsteps, and the low pulse of drums. Firelight reflected in countless eyes. In those eyes lingered recognition. For a moment, everyone belonged to the same circle. Some mounds align with lunar cycles, suggesting ceremonies tied to moon and stars. The night sky itself became part of the ritual, blending human exchange with celestial observation. Practical needs were met too. Roasted corn, squash, and dried meats shared among neighbors, each meal tasting richer in company. Traders likely joked about who brought the best recipes, turning competition into gentle humor. Even serious ceremonies made space for laughter around the fire. Over the hours, the atmosphere shifted. Early evening carried energy, mid-evening song. Late night, quiet conversation. The fire burned lower, voices softened, and exchanges became intimate. Objects passed directly into waiting hands, carrying trust, respect, and gratitude. These gatherings were political, spiritual, and commercial, seamlessly intertwined, warmed by the simple presence of flame. The night filled with sound, a steady chirp of crickets, wind rustling grasses and leaves across the plaza. Every noise felt amplified, as if the world itself leaned in to listen. The ceremony was never only human. It included the landscape, sky, and seasons. As darkness deepened, people rested near fires, wrapped in woven blankets. Embers glowed like fallen stars, and dreams mingled with ceremony, blurring, waking, and sleeping. Tomorrow trade routes would reopen, but tonight belonged entirely to the quiet warmth of firelight. Stepping back from the flames, you feel the night fold gently around you. Smoke drifts upward, carrying whispers of laughter, song, and the soft echo of conversation into the sky. Cahokia may have faded from memory, but its gatherings endure, a soft, persistent glow like coals that refuse to die. Even in stillness, the echoes of ritual, trade, and human connection linger, stretching across time and distance, carried as much in song, story, and gesture as in copper, shells, and woven baskets. You imagine this rhythm continuing the passing of objects, stories, and songs from hand to hand, generation to generation. Flames shrink into embers, yet their warmth and glow imprint themselves on memory. The silent plaza holds the echoes of countless footsteps, overlapping voices, and hearts beating together in quiet SYNCHRONY. As the night deepens, stars spill across the sky, mirroring sparks from long extinguished fires. You sense the layers of past activity, feet tracing paths across mounds, hands exchanging goods with care, voices sharing stories and laughter. Even the breeze seems to remember, brushing the tall grass and carrying faint whispers from the past. Here, trade is measured, not in transactions, but in connection. Each shared song, each exchanged object, each laugh weaves people into a web of respect and understanding. A rhythm of night, the soft chorus of nature, and the cadence of ceremonies keep Cahokia's pulse alive, a lasting testament to human community, ritual, and exchange across time and space. You breathe slowly, letting the scene imprint itself. The embers glow faintly, the wind whispers, and the stars above shimmer quietly. Tomorrow will come with renewed activity and trade. But for now, the night holds a gentle pause. Cahokia's spirit lingers here, a living echo of fires, songs, and human hands stretching across centuries, and you are witness to it, momentarily part of the circle. You approach a vast wall of green, rising gradually into the soft blue haze of distance. The Appalachians stretch out before you, not as jagged peaks, but as long, undulating ridges that fold gently into one another. Valleys are hidden between. The slopes, tucked away like whispered secrets waiting to be discovered. The mountains feel patient, timeless, as if they have been observing footsteps for countless generations. Walking here is different from traversing plains or deserts. The air is rich and moist, carrying the deep scent of pine, moss, and damp soil. Each step sinks quietly into the thick layer of fallen leaves, twigs, and needles, muffling your movement in a gentle rhythm. Birds flit through the canopy, there, calls weaving above and below the ridges, following you from one shaded bend to the next. Even the wind moves softly, brushing against the forest with a calm persistence. Here, every step, every sound, feels connected to the slow heartbeat of the mountains themselves. Traders cross these mountains carrying mica sheets, shiny and delicate. When polished, mica reflected light like mirrors, catching firelight in shimmering flashes. To offer mica was to offer both beauty and mystery, a glimpse of captured light carried from hidden veins deep in the earth. Archaeologists have found mica far from its Appalachian sources, even shaped into ceremonial figures. Imagine the astonishment of someone in the flatlands unwrapping a thin, shining sheet that glowed as if it had swallowed the sun. The mountains had given a gift that traveled with silent persistence. Other stones traveled too. Quartz, amethyst, and small gemstones from mountain streams became tokens of exchange. They may not have been currency in the modern sense, but they carried meaning. Each stone was both ordinary and extraordinary, shaped by water and time, given. New life in human hands. An obscure fact is that Appalachian traders sometimes transported hematite, a reddish iron mineral. Crushed into powder, it became pigment, used for body paint or rock art. To carry color across valleys was to carry a kind of language, silent but vivid, painted into ritual and memory. The trails themselves wound through quiet valleys. Footpaths followed rivers, climbed ridges, then descended again. Every ascent was rewarded with a view of endless green, every descent with a cool stream. Travelers must have joked about the mountains being indecisive, up, down, up again, never quite. Settling. The Appalachian Range was home to abundant life. Deer and turkey roamed freely. Rivers held fish, and forests offered nuts and berries. A trader could gather food along the way, though they still carried dried stores. The mountains provided both challenge and sustenance, testing patience without cruelty. One historical note is that copper from the Great Lakes sometimes met mica from the Appalachians, exchanged across vast distances. These networks stitched the continent together in subtle but steady threads. The mountains were not barriers but bridges, their ridges guiding travelers toward new encounters. At night, fires burned in sheltered valleys. Smoke curled upward, caught in tree branches before dispersing into the cool sky. Traders warmed their hands, passing mica sheets to each other, marveling at how flames danced in the reflections. The mountains seemed to smile back through shimmering stone. Some historians still debate the exact purpose of mica figures found in burial sites. Were they offerings to deities, symbols of power, or simply admired for beauty? The ambiguity lingers, like mountain mist, refusing to settle firmly into one interpretation. The soundscape of the mountains carried its own rhythm. Streams gurgled, owls hooted, crickets sang. Wind threaded through trees, producing a soft sighing that seemed to answer every question with calm indifference. You might think of it as nature's way of reminding traders to lower their voices. Travelers often used ridgelines as natural highways. Following high ground avoided swamps and offered long views. But ridges were not easy. The path curved endlessly, sometimes doubling back. Traders likely teased each other about the mountains being playful, as if hiding their valleys like children hiding toys. Artifacts found deep in Appalachian caves include shell beads and copper, goods that clearly did not originate there. This shows valleys as destinations, not just transit routes. People gathered to exchange, celebrate, and perhaps to seek shelter in the coolness of stone chambers. Another curious fact is that quartz crystals were sometimes placed carefully in burials. Their clarity and sparkle echoed the reflective power of mica. To leave a crystal with someone was to offer them eternal light. Even in the stillness of earth, the weather added another layer of rhythm. Mist often rolled in during morning, cloaking valleys in soft gray. Traders waited patiently for trails to clear, sipping warm drinks by small fires. Humor surely followed, someone remarking that the mountains were just shy and preferred to stay hidden. Historical records from early European explorers noted that these mountains already held established pathways used for centuries. The trade routes were not accidental, but carved by repetition, step after step, until the land itself remembered. The mountains carried not only stone, but also the memory of countless feet. You imagine a gathering in a quiet valley clearing. Goods lie arranged on woven mats, gleaming mica sheets, quartz crystals, powdered hematite, shell ornaments carried from distant coasts. Voices rise in exchange, some earnest, some playful. Children dart between groups, laughter weaving through the air like another form of trade. Night settles around the fires. The mountains, vast and silent, seem to lean closer, attentive. Shadows flicker across bark and stone, dancing in the firelight. Traders rest with full bellies and lighter burdens, the day's labor softened by shared presence. Tomorrow promises another climb, another descent, yet tonight belongs entirely to warmth, conversation, and the quiet shimmer of gifts passed from. Hand to hand. The Appalachians remain today, draped in forests, mist, and fog. Their valleys guard secrets, their ridges trace invisible paths into the sky. The mica endures, hidden within the rocks, waiting quietly to be discovered. And the echoes of those ancient exchanges linger still, soft as mist, steady as stone, timeless as the mountains themselves. In the quiet, you feel the rhythm of the past, the pulse of human connection, trade, and story that continues to flow through the land, carried on wind, memory, and stone. You picture yourself standing beside a quiet riverbank where the water moves slowly, reflecting soft ripples of evening light. Along the shore, a figure bends over copper, polishing its surface until it gleams like captured sunlight. The rhythmic motion seems almost meditative. The scene carries both practicality and beauty. Copper tools and ornaments were not just functional but luminous, catching firelight in ways that stone never could. To polish copper by water was to mirror sky and river together, joining earth and light in a single object. Trade carried copper far from its northern mines. The Great Lakes region was a primary source, where ancient people extracted it from veins in rock. Yet copper objects traveled deep into the continent, reaching valleys and forests where no raw copper existed. Shell ornaments followed similar paths, carved into beads, gorgets, and pendants. They left the coastal shores and arrived inland, even into the Ohio Valley. The shimmer of shells in distant landscapes must have felt like wearing a piece of the ocean against one's skin. Archaeologists have uncovered shell gorgets etched with spirals, birds, and suns. Their precise meaning remains elusive. Were they clan emblems, status markers, or ceremonial tokens? The designs hover in ambiguity, like shapes glimpsed through morning fog. inviting interpretation while resisting certainty. A lesser-known but charming detail is that copper was sometimes worked, cold without smelting. Craftspeople shaped it carefully, annealing with fire only when necessary. The process demanded patience and a steady rhythm, each tap deliberate and measured. You can imagine the artisan at work, perhaps murmuring jokes about how even copper seemed to grumble under the hammer, blending craft with humor. In these small gestures, skill, intention, and personality meet, giving life to metal across generations. The rivers carried these objects with a quiet, steady grace. Canoes, laden with copper, shells, and food, drifted downstream, guided by currents that linked distant communities. Waterways became the lifeblood of trade, pulsing with slow, deliberate movement. Just as blood nourishes the body, rivers carried connection ideas, goods, and trust across distances that walking alone would have made arduous. Even impossible. Archaeological evidence highlights the remarkable reach of these networks. Copper. Artifacts mined from Lake Superior have been discovered as far south as the Mississippi Valley, traveling hundreds of miles through hands and waterways. Each piece of copper was more than a utilitarian object. It was a symbol of human persistence and ingenuity, evidence of a social web that stretched across vast landscapes. Rivers not only transported goods, they carried culture, memory, and stories, flowing quietly yet powerfully through the lives of countless generations, knitting distant peoples together in ways both practical and profoundly human. The making of shell ornaments was equally intricate. Craftspeople drilled holes, carved lines, and polished surfaces until they shone smooth. The time invested turned each shell into something beyond its natural form, a crafted story that whispered of waves, salt, and shorelines far away. Some historians still debate whether shells were valued more for beauty or for spiritual meaning. Did the spiral represent life, water, or eternity? Or was it simply pleasing to the eye? The shells themselves remained silent, leaving only patterns to puzzle, and inspired. Evening along the rivers carried a gentle calm. Traders rested by small fires, the flames casting flickering light across copper tools and ornaments. One person lifted a shell bead, holding it to the fire, and watched it shimmer like a tiny fragment of the moon. Laughter likely followed someone, teasing that it was moon jewelry, a playful moment amid serious exchanges. Copper held meaning beyond its practical use. Many traditions attributed healing, warmth, or protective power to the metal. Whether these beliefs were shared widely or locally, copper carried symbolic weight. To gift copper was to give more than utility. It was to offer trust, care, and attention, a tangible link between hands and hearts. Shell beads traveled long distances, strung together into necklaces that passed from person to person. Each bead contained the story of its maker, its journey, through forests, rivers, and settlements. Wearing one was more than adornment. It was a way to carry voices from faraway places, layers of stories whispering softly in unison. The objects themselves became vessels of connection, memory, and exchange, turning trade into a quiet celebration of human creativity, endurance, and community. An obscure discovery in the Ohio Valley revealed caches of shells buried deliberately, not scattered by accident. These deposits suggest ritual offerings, perhaps gifts to the earth itself. The act of burial transformed trade goods into sacred gestures, returning them to ground after long journeys. The work of polishing copper was never rushed. Craftspeople sat for hours, smoothing edges, coaxing shine. The slow pace matched the river's flow, steady and calm. You might say the copper taught patience, though if copper had opinions, it probably wished people would leave it alone. Historical finds also include copper plates with embossed designs. These were not tools but art, expressions of creativity that still gleam faintly after centuries. They remind us that trade was not only about survival, it was also about beauty, wonder, and the joy of creating something lasting. The exchange of copper and shells wove together communities separated by rivers, forests, and plains. Miners from the Great Lakes, coastal gatherers, and inland farmers all took part in a delicate network that relied on trust and shared knowledge across vast distances. Each item carried more than material value. It carried stories, intentions, and connections. Every trade was a handshake that reached beyond immediate neighbors, linking hands, eyes, and lives across landscapes that, as night fell, the rivers became lullabies for weary travelers. The gentle murmur of water replaced conversation, carrying secrets. Softly into the darkness, shells rested bundled in woven bags, copper tools stacked with care, glinting faintly in the flickering firelight. Tomorrow, the travelers would rise again, continuing their slow journeys along winding paths. But tonight, the objects seemed to sleep, resting like stars scattered across a quiet sky. You step back from the riverbank, listening to its steady rhythm. The copper glints, the shells shimmer, and the memory of the trade routes lingers in the current. Even now, rivers carry the echo of human connection, flowing with stories polished by time, as enduring and quiet as the waters themselves. You step into the northern wilderness, where snow spreads across the land in thick, almost reverent silence. The air is crisp, each breath sharp, filling lungs with a purity that startles at first. Pines sway gently above, releasing scents of resin that drifts slowly through the still air, lingering like incense from ages past. The forest seems aware of its own quiet, every sound magnified, the soft snap of a twig underfoot, the distant rustle of a furred creature, the faint whistle of wind through needle-laden branches. The cold does not chase life away. Instead, it sharpens awareness, heightens every sense. A fire crackles in the center of a small camp, its amber glow offering warmth and comfort. Figures gather near the flames, wrapped in furs that carry the stories of previous hunts and winters. Endured, shadows leap and dance across packed snow, forming shapes that merge with the darkened forest. Each person's breath forms tiny clouds, merging with the smoke curling from the fire, a quiet exhalation that binds humans to the land. Flint is prized here, more valuable than it first appears. A spark from flint can mean survival, the difference between a long, cold night and warmth. Carefully knapped, it becomes blades and scrapers, essential tools for processing hides, cutting wood, and preparing food. Northern winters, harsh and unrelenting, demanded such tools. Without flint, survival was precarious. Beyond its practical use, flint held symbolic weight, a measure of skill and foresight, each carefully chipped edge a testament to human ingenuity. Historical discoveries show that flint from these northern lands traveled far south, carried over rivers, ridges, and vast forests. Tools crafted in these camps have been found in distant regions, sometimes hundreds of miles away. Each piece represents more than utility. It tells a story of connection, resilience, and human determination to reach across forbidding landscapes. Even in isolation, communities were linked. Threads of survival and exchange weaving a quiet network. The fur trade was a central part of this life, long before European merchants arrived. Pelts, fox, beaver, and other animals offered warmth, protection, and social value. Exchanging a pelt was to share life itself. A well-prepared fur could shield against the harshest nights, and to trade it was an act of generosity and trust. A cloak or layered hides carried gratitude, sustenance, and a deep sense of interdependence, binding individuals into networks of mutual reliance. Small carvings on stones add layers to this picture. Spirals, animals, and abstract forms appear. Near campsites, left by hands long gone, Their meaning is elusive. Were they messages, records, ritual objects, or playful sketches? Each carving stands as a frozen whisper, a presence carved into stone that outlasts generations. Historians debate whether these marks were decorative or sacred. Without written records, certainty fades like snow in the fire's heat. They remain silent witnesses, companions to firelit nights, recording laughter, ritual, and perhaps private prayer. Traders gathered around firelight, passing flint nodules, furs, and small carved stones. Exchanges are deliberate, unhurried, steeped in trust. Each trade carries subtle nuance, a nod, a smile, a shared understanding. Trade is calm, intimate, and social. Even the northern sky participates. Stars scatter like shards of flint across the black velvet above, while aurora curtains shimmer in green and violet, dancing across ridges. Perhaps some carvings echo these celestial displays, a terrestrial mirror of the northern lights. The camp setting allows humor to flourish. Someone may joke that carrying heavy furs counts as exercise. Another might laugh at their flint sparks, brighter than their companions' stories. Even in extreme cold, humor warms the spirit, creating bonds alongside necessity and survival. Caches of flint discovered by archaeologists suggest people valued these tools highly, storing them for future use or concealing them for safekeeping. The careful placement and preservation of resources show foresight, planning, and respect for critical materials. Trade routes follow subtle markers: frozen rivers, open clearings, and narrow woodland paths. Winter itself smooths travel, allowing sleds to glide over snow-covered trails that would be impassable in summer. Cold becomes an ally, shaping mobility and enabling connection. Fur garments are vital. Caribou hides layered for insulation protect traders during nights when exposed. Skin would freeze instantly. To trade a pelt is to share life itself, offering warmth as much as sustenance. Each exchange carries gratitude, respect, and recognition of survival's fragility. Soapstone lamps, shaped carefully and filled with animal fat, illuminate shelters. These small fires burn steadily, lighting evenings long before matches existed, giving comfort, security, and continuity. The blend of utility and art shaped northern life. Flint, furs, and carved stones served both practical and symbolic purposes. Even tiny etchings might hold ritual significance or preserve memory. At night, songs echoed through camps, mingling with the sigh of wind, the crackle of firewood, and the hush of snow. These melodies recorded history, guided travelers, and carried playful humor, teasing snorers or celebrating shared victories. Music, like trade, wove people together, creating bonds that transcended survival alone. In this way, everyday objects, sound, and song merged, sustaining both community and culture in the harsh northern wilderness. The endurance of northern people is written into the land itself. Trails, camps, and carvings testify to lives lived with intention. Harsh climates did not prevent culture or connection. They shaped it. Trade, storytelling, and ritual thrived alongside survival, proving that human ingenuity and collaboration flourished even in the most extreme environments. Each object, each carving, each shared moment carries weight, threading history across landscapes. Morning light creeps across the snow. Traders lift bundles, the metallic clink of flint and the rustle of furs mixing with the crisp air. Paths lead toward distant groups, carrying warmth, fire, and the enduring mysteries of carved stone. The wilderness itself becomes memory, whispering stories across ridges and forests. Carvings remain silent and patient, awaiting interpreters, who may never arrive. The northern landscape pulses with echoes of human life. Trade, songs, laughter, and survival rhythms merge. The cold, far from empty, is presence-shaping, guiding, and preserving culture. Even in stillness, connection thrives. Objects, knowledge, and stories pass from hand to hand, generation to generation. The fire dims, embers glow faintly, and the northern winds continue their whispers, carrying both silence and story across the endless, snow-clad forests. You move quietly along a forest trail, the thick carpet of pine needles muting every step. The air feels sacred, as though the woods themselves are watching, holding their breath. Traders walk deliberately, bearing bundles wrapped with care. These are not merely goods. They carry stories, intentions, and connection across distances. Among the items are stone pipes, each carefully carved and treated with reverence. Some are simple, functional shapes. Others are intricate, adorned with animal motifs, spirals, and symbolic designs. Each pipe is more than a tool. It is a vessel of meaning, embodying ritual, respect, and diplomacy. When passed from hand to hand, the exchange is quiet but weighty, a gesture that bridges communities. The objects themselves hold memory, and the act of carrying and offering them strengthens bonds, linking travelers, families, and generations through shared understanding. In this forest, trade is as much about human connection as it is about material exchange. Archaeologists have discovered such pipes scattered across regions far from their places of origin. This wide distribution suggests they were more than tools for smoking. They may have served as gifts, tokens of peace, or ceremonial instruments linking distant communities together. Some historians still debate whether pipes were primarily used in spiritual rituals or in political negotiations. Were they tools of prayer, carrying smoke upward like messages, or were they instruments of agreement, sealing decisions with shared breath? The ambiguity endures, as steady as the trails themselves. A fascinating detail about these pipes is that many were carved from catalanite, a soft red stone sourced from specific quarries. Even today, these quarries are considered sacred by some indigenous communities. To carry a pipe made from this stone was to carry a fragment of hallowed ground, a tangible connection to place and ancestry. Trade involving ritual objects extended beyond pipes. Ornaments crafted from bone, antler, or rare minerals were exchanged, each handled with care and reverence. These items were never offered casually. Their transfer was accompanied by words, gestures, and intent, turning every gift into something closer to a promise than a mere transaction. Picture a quiet moment by the fire, where two groups meet to exchange a carved pipe. No voices rise above a whisper. The air is still, save for the gentle crackle of flames. Each gesture, the passing of the object, the bow of heads, the careful handling, carries weight. The exchange feels almost cosmic, as if the universe itself leans into witness. In this way, trade becomes more than material. It is ceremony, memory, and human connection, all bound together in a shared moment of quiet respect. Humor would still appear, even in solemn moments. Perhaps someone joked about a pipe being too finely carved to actually use, the way modern people joke about fancy plates never leaving the cupboard. Laughter softened the seriousness, allowing warmth to blend with ritual. Historically, pipes have been found in burial sites, sometimes accompanied by other valued objects. Their presence in graves suggests they guided journeys beyond life, connecting earthly paths to those unseen. They were both companion and guide, enduring beyond a single lifetime. Obscure carvings on certain pipes include birds, spirals, and human forms. Their exact significance has faded with time. Were they clan symbols, mythic references, or personal marks of identity? Each design lingers as a riddle, etched into stone that refuses to explain itself. Not only pipes, but ritual objects of many forms traveled along these networks. Shell gorgets, copper ornaments, and carved effigies moved from hand to hand. Each carried layers of meaning, their trade less about utility and more about shared values and collective memory. The making of ritual objects required immense patience. Shaping stone into a pipe or bone into an ornament was not quick. It was deliberate, reflective, even meditative. You might say that patience was the first ingredient, though perhaps carvers joked about wishing for faster tools. Stone pipes often had smooth surfaces, polished until they gleamed. Touching them must have felt like handling flowing water captured in solid form. That sensation alone might have given them a power beyond practicality, a reminder that even stone could carry softness at gatherings. These objects were displayed with care. They were not tossed into piles or weighed like grain. Instead, they were presented slowly in a circle of people. The moment of exchange was a performance of respect, as graceful as any ceremony. Archaeologists have discovered that many pipes were carved into effigies of animals, bears, birds, and other creatures. These forms likely carried deep symbolic meaning, representing strength, guidance, or transformation. Each effigy served as a bridge between the natural world and human society, connecting people to the spirits and qualities embodied by the animals. A lesser-known detail is that fragments of broken pipes were sometimes preserved rather than discarded. Even in pieces, these objects retained their significance, much like a cherished mug kept despite a crack, holding memories and emotional weight. The broken fragments remind us that the value of ritual objects was not only in their physical integrity, but in the meaning imbued through use and care. The routes used to transport these ritual items were rarely the quickest paths. Traders and participants moved steadily, carefully, ensuring that each object arrived safely at its destination. In this way, the journey itself became a form of ritual. Every step honored the object's symbolic weight, turning travel into a deliberate act of respect, devotion, and continuity across both space and generations. At night, ritual objects rested beside fires, glowing faintly in the flickering light. Their presence seemed to change the air, lending stillness. Traders spoke softly, as if unwilling to disturb. The silent authority that emanated from carved stone and polished shell-dot. As dawn arrived, the objects were gathered again, tied securely in bundles. The journey continued, not hurried but mindful. With every step, pipes, shells, and effigies carried their quiet messages across rivers, forests, and mountains, weaving together threads of trust, memory, and reverence. You linger in the image of one hand passing a pipe to another. The act is simple, but its meaning runs deep, like water beneath ice. These ritual objects endure, not because of their form, but because of the silent respect that traveled with them. You enter a desert where silence dominates, and even the faintest sound seems magnified. The late sun paints the sand with a muted golden glow, while cacti stand as still sentinels, their shadows stretching across the vast, empty horizon. Landscape feels both timeless and immense, holding stories in its dunes and ridges. Ancient paths thread through this space, nearly invisible now. Footprints have long since vanished, and wind-blown dust has erased the markers that once guided travelers. Still, you can feel their presence in subtle traces, slight depressions in sand, faint alignments of stones, and the rhythm of distant ridges meeting sky. The desert holds memory as much as earth, whispering hints of those who moved across it centuries ago. Trade here required endurance and careful planning. Water was rationed, each sip weighed against miles yet to be traveled. Travelers moved deliberately, their pace steady, knowing that haste could be fatal. Each step was an act of resilience, each pause a measure of patience. Crossing these arid expanses was less about speed and more about rhythm, attention, and the quiet determination that allowed life and commerce to persist even in the harshest conditions. Historical evidence shows that shells from the Pacific coast reached deep into desert communities. Found in sites hundreds of miles from the ocean, they testify to networks that spanned harsh environments. Each shell was proof that desert pathways carried life, beauty, and resilience. The mystery remains. How did these shells travel so far? Did traders walk entire stretches, or were they passed from group to group? Archaeologists cannot say with certainty. The desert holds its secrets tightly, whispering answers only to wind and time. An obscure but fascinating fact is that desert. Travelers sometimes followed the blooms of wildflowers after rare rains. These fleeting paths offered food, color, and direction. To walk through deserts at such times was to see them briefly transformed into gardens of quiet wonder. At night, stars became the guides. Without landmarks, the desert sky served as compass. Travelers read constellations the way others read maps, navigating by the steady glow above. One can imagine jokes about which star was brighter, as if stars themselves competed for attention. Some historians still debate whether desert routes were continuous highways or chains of small exchanges. Perhaps no one crossed the entire distance. Goods may have shifted slowly from hand to hand, like stories retold across generations, never losing their thread. Archaeological finds include caches of shells and turquoise buried in the sands. These suggest that travelers sometimes left offerings or stored goods temporarily. Were they markers of territory or hidden savings for future journeys? No clear answer remains, only objects resting quietly in earth. The desert shaped the pace of exchange. Movement was slow, careful, and mindful. Bundles were small but significant, carrying items too precious to lose. To trade in the desert was to value not quantity but meaning, each object a treasure guarded by patience. Waterholes served as anchors along these routes. Small springs or shaded canyons provided relief, turning desolate stretches into temporary havens. Around such places, stories surely flourished. Perhaps someone joked that the water tasted better after 100 miles, as if thirst were the best seasoning. In some regions, petroglyphs mark canyon walls. Figures of spirals, animals, and human forms are etched into stone. These carvings, like the shells, raise questions. Were they waypoints, spiritual signs, or messages for others? Their meanings drift just out of reach, like mirages. Trade across deserts was not only about shells. Obsidian, salt, and bright pigments also traveled along these paths. Each item carried both material and symbolic value. Salt preserved food. Pigments brightened ceremonies, and obsidian blades cut with precision sharper than memory itself. One lesser-known discovery revealed shell beads mixed with desert sand inside ceremonial structures. Their placement suggests intentional use, perhaps in rituals of renewal or prayer. Imagine the sound of beads clinking softly together, like ocean waves remembered in the stillness of desert night. Crossing deserts required more than endurance. It demanded community and knowledge. Travelers depended on guides who understood hidden waterholes, wind patterns, and the movements of stars. Without such wisdom, journeys could fail, and survival itself hung on careful attention. Trust became as vital as water or food, exchanged between people and reinforced with every shared step. Even in such solemn conditions, humor persisted. Someone surely joked about sand invading every corner, a complaint repeated across generations. Laughter might have echoed through dry canyons, a small reminder that even in silence, human spirits sought relief and likeness. At sunset, the desert transformed. The sky shifted to shades of rose and gold, softening the harsh land. Shadows stretched across dunes, and the air cooled, offering respite. For those final hours of light, walking felt easier, almost gentle, as if the desert itself granted a brief reprieve, blending endurance, beauty, and human presence into a fleeting, shared moment. As night settled over the desert, fires flickered. in sheltered hollows, casting warm light across sand and stone. Shells rested beside turquoise and obsidian, their surfaces catching the glow like fragments of distant oceans and mountains. Traders exchanged quiet songs, their voices blending with the whisper of the wind, a gentle rhythm that made the desert feel less like a challenge and more like a companion. Shadows stretched across dunes, dancing lightly as the flames flickered, and every spark seemed to echo the stories carried across the sand. When dawn arrived, the desert transformed again. The sand cooled under the early light, and travelers rose from their firelit camps, gathering bundles of shells, stones, and other precious items. The routes they followed were not marked by carved paths or roads, but by memory, by the careful placement of shells, small carvings, and the whispered stories of generations who had walked before. Each step reinforced the continuity of exchange. Connecting distant people across time and space. You leave the desert slowly, carrying its quiet rhythm within you. The stillness lingers, softened by laughter, deepened by the resonance of shells far from the sea. The desert keeps its secrets, yet its hum continues to follow, gentle and persistent, as you move onward. You step into a sunlit clearing where gentle conversation hums through the air, mingling with the subtle rhythms of daily life. People move deliberately, carrying baskets, pottery, and carefully wrapped bundles. This is a seasonal marketplace, its pace measured, calm, and communal, a space more like a reunion of friends than a competitive exchange. Every step feels intentional, every gesture meaningful, as traders weave among goods, neighbors, and visitors from distant settlements. The soundscape is soft yet alive. Flutes carved from bone or reed offer simple, flowing melodies, while wooden drums keep a steady, deliberate beat, like the pulse of the gathering itself. Children dart between groups, laughter rising and falling like wind across the clearing. Their voices blend seamlessly with the murmur of trade, forming a gentle background to the music and ritual sounds that infuse the space. Despite the activity, a quiet calm persists, as if the marketplace itself breathes with its people. Food anchors the gathering. Roasted corn, berries, and savory stews simmer over low fires, their aromas drifting across the clearing. Someone jokes that no one can trade on an empty stomach, and laughter spreads. Sharing a meal strengthens connections, signaling care, trust, and community alongside the exchange of goods. Archaeological evidence offers vivid glimpses into these ancient gatherings. Pottery fragments recovered from sites reveal overlapping. Styles from different regions, layered in soil as if communities left traces of their journeys. These shards show that people traveled great distances to attend marketplaces, bringing vessels, ornaments, and tools infused with local traditions. A single pot might bear motifs familiar to one region, yet be crafted from clay sourced hundreds of miles away. Even pigments used for decoration often came from distant quarries, underscoring extensive trade networks and human mobility. Each vessel carries multiple layers of meaning, practical utility, aesthetic beauty, and a tangible record of interconnected communities. These marketplaces were never purely economic. They functioned as social, spiritual, and ceremonial spaces where commerce and ritual intertwined. Songs and dances accompanied trade, lending cultural significance to every exchange. A pot, woven cloth, or ornament was never just an object. It was passed with intention, respect, and acknowledgement of shared values. Careful handling reinforced the weight of the act itself, fostering trust and sustaining networks across villages long after the market emptied. Picture yourself walking slowly through the clearing. Stalls overflow with nuts, dried fruit, and baskets of prepared goods. Hides are stacked neatly, pottery glistens in sunlight, and hands reach to exchange items, often without bargaining. Humor softens interactions. Someone jokes that a pot is too beautiful for stew, or a blanket might lull its owner to oversleep. Laughter circulates as freely as the goods themselves, becoming another form of connection in this living tapestry of trade, story, and community. Historical centers such as Cahokia served as focal points for these seasonal gatherings. Communities from across regions converged, filling clearings and plazas with color, sound, and scent. Markets functioned both as practical spaces for trade and as symbolic arenas of unity. Certain areas specialized in particular goods. Shell. Ornaments shimmered in one corner, stone tools clinked in another, while textiles and baskets created waves of color and texture. Walking through the market would have felt like drifting through a living tapestry, every sense engaged, every step an encounter with human creativity and connection. Archaeologists have discovered evidence that some vessels were more than tools. Of daily trade, they were integral to ceremonial practice. Deliberately buried caches of broken pottery suggest ritual closure, honoring the objects and acknowledging the significance of exchange. These findings highlight the spiritual dimensions of marketplaces, showing that commerce and ceremony were deeply intertwined. Through such practices, marketplaces became sites of cultural memory, embedding shared values, stories, and knowledge within everyday objects. Storytelling was central to these gatherings. Elders recounted myths, lessons, and anecdotes, connecting distant communities through narrative. Stories, like traded goods, moved from hand to hand and generation to generation. Trickster tales, heroic epics, and humorous accounts offered entertainment, moral guidance, and cultural cohesion. Children absorbed songs, observed artisans, and learned techniques and social practices, ensuring the transmission of knowledge. Markets thus served as spaces for education, cultural exchange, and initiation into broader networks of understanding. The sensory experience was immersive. Brightly decorated pottery mirrored the colors of clothing, while music, laughter, and conversation wove together a rich soundscape. Even silence had meaning. A nod sealing an agreement, careful handling of delicate objects, or attentive observation during rituals. Trade extended beyond tangible goods: dried fish, preserved meats, copper, shells, stone, and woven materials carried stories, histories, and symbolic weight. Each act of exchange reinforced trust, connection, and community. Seasonal marketplaces functioned as hubs of communication, memory, and culture, their influence far exceeding the boundaries of the clearing itself. Daily rhythms shaped life in the marketplace. Morning lights signaled preparation. Midday brought focused trade, storytelling, and rituals. Evening softened the pace. As fires dimmed, voices quieted, and traders carefully packed goods for journeys to rivers, forests, or plains. The clearing slowly emptied, leaving faint smoke, roasted corn, and the subtle imprint of footsteps, laughter, and conversation. Long after, the marketplace's influence endured. Pottery shards, pigments, tools, and preserved foods testified to far-reaching networks. Stories and songs traveled with participants, embedding memory, culture, and human presence into the landscape and its natural rhythms. You leave the clearing gently, carrying the marketplace's rhythm with you. The voices, music, and subtle laughter remain vivid in memory. The marketplace fades physically, but its exchanges, material, social, spiritual, linger. Trade was never only about goods. It was about connection, shared experience, and the deliberate weaving of community across time. Every object, song, and gesture contributes to this web, linking generations and landscapes through human creativity, trust, and care, even in its absence. The marketplace pulses in memory, a place where goods, stories, and people converge in a dance of human ingenuity and culture. It was more than a market. It was a living network, a celebration of cooperation, ritual, and community, leaving traces that echo across centuries. In every shard of pottery, every woven basket, and every exchanged object, the enduring legacy of trust, humor, artistry, and human connection continues to speak, long after the fires have cooled. You stand on a quiet riverbank at dawn, where mist curls above the water like soft smoke. The river moves with gentle persistence, reflecting the pale light of morning, broken only by the slow drift of dugout canoes carved from massive tree trunks. Each canoe carries bundles carefully wrapped in fibers, obsidian blades, flint nodules, and ornaments shaped from bone, treasures meant for trade or ceremony. The paddlers lean into the current, moving with deliberate patience, trusting the river to carry them safely along its winding course. Rivers served as lifelines for ancient communities, linking distant settlements across vast landscapes. Archaeological evidence shows that obsidian tools traveled hundreds of miles from volcanic sources, moving along these waterways through networks of exchange. Canoes provided efficiency, safety, and continuity, turning rivers into natural highways. Long before roads existed, their steady flow required no human maintenance, only an understanding of currents, seasonal shifts, and the rhythm of water. The river itself shaped human connection. Trade depended not just on objects, but on knowledge, skill, and trust. Each paddle stroke, each carefully balanced bundle, reflected a combination of practicality and communal understanding. Through these waterways, distant communities became linked, their relationships flowing as surely as the rivers themselves. Along the riverbanks, the burial of caches adds an air of mystery to the landscape. Archaeologists have uncovered carefully arranged deposits of obsidian flint and ornaments placed with deliberate care. These arrangements hint at purpose, perhaps as offerings to the river, perhaps as safekeeping for later use. The exact meaning remains uncertain, yet the intention is unmistakable, suggesting that the waterways themselves were woven into ritual and human practice. Particularly intriguing detail is that some caches contain broken tools alongside intact ones. Rather than being discarded, these fragments were treated with respect, as if even broken pieces retained their power and memory. Each shard, each splinter of stone carried significance, a silent witness to the people who crafted, used, and preserved it. You imagine a trader sitting by the river, smoothing the edge of a flint blade. The rhythmic sound of stone against stone blends with the soft murmur of flowing water. A companion chuckles, teasing that the blade shines so brightly it could serve as a mirror, though certainly not a practical one for shaving. In these moments, work, play, and ritual intertwine seamlessly. The river, the tools, and the people all participate in a quiet, enduring rhythm of connection, care, and shared life. Flint and obsidian were vital, their edges cut through hide, wood, and fiber with precision. To trade such materials was to trade survival itself. Yet their shimmering surfaces also carried beauty, reflecting firelight like frozen lightning, each spark a reminder of their origin in Earth's depths. Some historians still debate the purpose of buried river caches. Were they tributes to spirits of water, markers of territory, or reserves for future use? The ambiguity remains, leaving room for gentle speculation. Perhaps they were all three, depending on time and place. Night along the river must have been serene. Canoes pulled onto the bank, fires kindled low, voices carried softly across the current. Smoke rose toward the stars, while the river's constant hum answered with lullabies only water can compose. Obsidian especially carried mystery. Its deep black surface reflected faint light, appearing at once dark and luminous. People may have seen it as a substance of transformation, born of volcanic fire but carried by calm rivers, a paradox held in every shard. Archaeological discoveries reveal that ornaments were often buried with individuals near river valleys. Polished stone beads, finely crafted obsidian points, and other personal items suggest intentional placement, not casual loss. These objects hint that rivers guided people not only through life, but perhaps also in journeys beyond, embedding waterways into both practical and spiritual realms. The canoes themselves are remarkable feats of skill and patience. Carefully hollowed, using fire and tools, each dugout canoe could last for years, serving as both a vessel of trade and a link between families and communities. You can imagine the carvers at work, perhaps joking that the tree granted its cooperation only reluctantly, or teasing one another about who struck the wood too hard in some regions. Canoes were coated with animal fat or resin, a lesser known, but practical measure that improved water resistance and durability. This detail also likely sparked humor. Someone surely remarked that their canoe smelled as if it had just been cooked for dinner. These small touches, careful construction, protective coatings, and playful banter reveal the human presence in every object, illustrating that trade, craft, and companionship flowed together as naturally as the rivers themselves. The pace of travel by canoe mirrored the river itself, steady, unhurried, and reliable. Traders rested their paddles, letting currents carry them downstream. The river did not demand speed. It only asked for respect, and in return it offered safe passage. Goods were stacked carefully to balance weight. Obsidian and flint rested alongside. Food supplies, furs, and woven mats. Each bundle was tied neatly, ensuring nothing toppled into water. Even so, laughter likely followed when a trader inevitably dropped something precious into the river. The riverbanks themselves offered resources: clay for pottery, reeds for weaving, fish for nourishment. Trade journeys were not only about transport, but also about discovery. Each stop provided materials that enriched both the traders and the communities they met along the way. As evening fell, reflections on the water doubled every light. Fires on shore shimmered like twin stars. Canoes rocked gently, pulled onto sandbars, their hulls whispering as water slipped away. Traders sang low songs, their voices joining river and sky. By morning, the journey resumed. Canoes slid into the current, paddles dipping with steady rhythm. Bundles of obsidian, flint, and ornaments moved safely toward distant valleys, each carrying not just material value, but the weight of ritual, memory, and the mysteries of buried caches resting quietly beneath the soil. You pause to watch a canoe drift, its hull barely disturbing the water. The river hums a soft, eternal song, carrying tools, objects, and stories together. These flowing currents linked past and present, guiding travelers and observers alike, weaving human activity into the larger rhythm of the landscape, and carrying the pulse of time gently onward. You sit beside a low fire as night settles in. Sparks drift upward slowly, vanishing into the dark sky like patient messengers. The crackle of burning wood blends with murmured stories, each drifting as softly as the curling smoke. Along ancient trade routes, objects carried more than material value. They conveyed meaning. Spirals etched into shell pendants, birds painted onto pottery, and abstract marks carved into stone blades spoke of shared imagination and cultural knowledge. Each symbol traveled as far as the objects themselves, bridging distant communities. These motifs were more than decoration. They were messages, memory, and connection, passing silently from hand to hand. The firelight illuminates their forms, allowing the stories embedded in each piece to whisper across time. Historians still debate whether these recurring motifs represent universal myths, cultural borrowing, or simply pleasing designs. Spirals appear on artifacts from the Great Lakes to the Southwest, suggesting a message that transcended boundaries. Yet no one can say exactly what the spirals meant. One little-known fact is that some spirals were carved into tools meant for daily use, not ceremonial display. The presence of decoration on utilitarian items suggests meaning woven seamlessly into life. Even chopping wood could become an act surrounded by quiet symbolism. Bird motifs carried similar intrigue. Stylized figures resembling cranes, turkeys, or thunderbirds appear widely across regions. Their presence on objects tied to trade suggests these birds were not only food or companions of migration, but symbols of connection. They became winged emblems of exchange. You imagine a trader handing over a necklace shaped like a bird. The recipient tilts their head, recognizing not just ornament but story. Perhaps the bird represented guidance. Perhaps it meant freedom. Or perhaps, as one person joked, it was simply the earliest form of bird-watching club membership. The Mississippian culture, particularly at Cahokia, left evidence of birdman imagery. Figures half human, half bird appear on engraved shells. Their presence suggests mythological narratives tied to power and transformation. These symbols reach distant lands through trade, their meanings stretching like wings across time. The spiral continues to whisper across time. Etched on shells, pottery, and carved stones, it may have represented water, wind, or the cycles of life. Its simple curves conceal profound meaning, each turn guiding the eye inward or outward, echoing journeys both personal and communal, and connecting generations through shared symbolism. Archaeologists have uncovered caches of shell gorgets, featuring nearly identical spiral designs spanning hundreds of miles. Such findings hint at far-reaching networks of communication and cultural exchange. Were artisans trained in a common style, or did the spiral hold sacred significance that demanded consistency across regions? Perhaps both. The uniformity suggests a deep understanding of form and function, a visual language shared among communities separated by vast distances. Even today, the spiral retains its enigmatic presence. It is more than decoration. It is a symbol that traversed landscapes and generations, quietly embedding meaning in everyday objects. Its loops speak to continuity, connection, and the enduring human impulse to leave a mark that guides, unites, and inspires. A curious but often overlooked detail is that some spirals were accompanied by dots or small lines, subtle additions that changed meaning. They may have represented stars, raindrops, or directions. The difference was small, but perhaps in those days, small details spoke volumes. Myths connected to these objects likely flowed as smoothly as rivers. Around fires, traders told stories that traveled farther than they did. A carved spiral might be explained as a path into the world of ancestors, or as the coil of a wind that carries messages skyward. Bird figures, meanwhile, often played roles in creation tales. The thunderbird in particular was thought to control storms, flashing lightning from its wings. To trade a thunderbird-shaped ornament may have been to carry both beauty and protection. The gesture united practical exchange with spiritual offering. Some historians suggest these symbols functioned as a shared visual language. Spirals and other motifs allowed distant communities to recognize kinship and cultural connection without spoken words. A spiral carved in one region could be understood by another, communicating meaning across vast distances and differing tongues. These objects often appeared in burials, indicating roles beyond the everyday. Placed with the dead, they may have offered guidance in the afterlife. A bird-shaped pendant could point toward the sky, while a spiral might represent the endless journey of the soul. Each symbol carried layers of meaning, identity, memory, and cosmology linking life, death, and community through imagery. Through these carvings, artisans encoded stories, beliefs, and connections that transcended generations, creating a silent yet enduring form of communication. That an amusing thought occurs when you picture a group of artisans debating which spiral looked best. One says the design should coil clockwise, another prefers counterclockwise, and eventually they compromise. If nothing else, It proves that graphic design arguments are timeless. Beyond humor, the persistence of these motifs shows how deeply they mattered. They linked communities, beliefs, and identities across landscapes. Each symbol carried more than beauty. It carried continuity, ensuring stories survived the passage of generations and the distance of miles. Archaeological evidence from the Ohio River Valley reveals pipes carved with bird figures. These objects were both functional and symbolic, used in ceremony and diplomacy. The presence of shared imagery highlights how symbols carried authority, bridging both trade and politics. The whisper of lore reminds you that stories often hide inside objects. A carved stone may appear simple, yet its spiral might echo winds that once guided canoes. A pendant shaped like a bird may hold in its wings a song no longer sung out as the fire wanes. The symbols around you seem to shimmer faintly in the darkness. Spirals curl inward like quiet meditations, while birds rise silently toward the stars. Night deepens, and you feel lifted by the enduring power of imagery that refuses to fade. Leaning back, you hear the gentle hum of distant crickets and sense the low flow of a river nearby, unseen but present. Objects, myths, and symbols intertwine, forming a delicate web of meaning. This soft net carries both past and present, holding memory, connection, and imagination in its threads. A quiet testament to human creativity and continuity across time. You sit in the soft hush of twilight, the fire reduced to glowing embers. The quiet seems deeper than before, as if the woods and rivers themselves have paused to remember the fading echoes of trade that once carried voices across forests, plains, and winding waterways. In this stillness, you feel the slow rhythm of time pressing gently, tracing the paths of canoes, the footsteps of traders, and the long arcs of connection that once linked communities across vast landscapes. The great networks that stretched through valleys, along rivers, and over ridges did not vanish suddenly. They thinned gradually, like the worn threads of an old woven basket. One pathway became quieter, then another, until the hum of exchange grew faint against the horizon. Archaeological layers quietly reveal the story of shrinking networks. Sites that once contained abundant caches of obsidian, flint, shell, and copper now show far fewer artifacts. The absence is as meaningful as presence. Communities continue to thrive, yet the long-distance arcs of trade, ceremony, and ritual gradually contracted. Scholars continue to debate the causes of this gradual quieting of long-distance networks. Climate shifts appear to have played a central role. Variations in rainfall or prolonged drought could disrupt agriculture, reducing surpluses necessary to sustain trade. Rivers that had once allowed easy passage grew shallow or unpredictable, while fields that supported travelers and regional exchange faltered. Communities increasingly turned inward, relying on local and reliable resources. Pollen and sediment evidence confirms these shifts. Forests receded, grasslands expanded, soil eroded, and farmland productivity declined. Environmental pressures reshaped the possibilities for human connection, leaving lasting marks on networks. Social and political factors compounded these changes. Conflict could fracture once cooperative communities, turning trade routes into cautious boundaries. Alliances weakened, ceremonial gatherings became less frequent, and the movement of exotic goods slowed. The decline of Cahokia in the 13th century exemplifies this pattern. A hub of commerce, ritual, and governance whose quieting rippled outward, affecting networks across hundreds of miles. Cultural transformation also played a part. As societies evolved, symbols and motif, spirals, bird forms, and other recurring designs sometimes lost urgency. Long-distance exchange practices shifted as local subsistence, defense, and new ceremonial priorities reshaped daily life and regional connections. Change, like a river, always carves new paths, while leaving traces of what flowed before. One subtle yet telling detail appears in later artifacts. Shell ornaments, copper items, and pottery retain familiar motif spirals, bird forms, and geometric designs, but the craftsmanship often shows less refinement than in earlier periods. Spirals may be more roughly carved, words less detailed, suggesting memory without full technical mastery. These objects reflect fading connections, a thinning of long-distance networks, and the diminished transmission of skills and symbolic knowledge across regions. The decline in technical precision quietly signals the contraction of once vibrant exchanges. You imagine a trader arriving at a familiar river bend, bundles carefully stowed in a canoe. In earlier times, colleagues would be waiting, exchanging greetings, stories, and goods. Now, the path feels emptier. The river hums as before, trees rustle in the wind, but no voices welcome the arrival. The trader sets down his goods, sighs, and jokes that perhaps everyone overslept. Humor remains, a quiet testament to enduring human connection even as networks contract. Trade did not disappear entirely. Local exchanges persisted, sustaining relationships within smaller regions. Copper, shell, flint, and stone still circulated, though rarely across the vast distances of prior centuries. Items that once crossed half a continent now traveled only between neighboring valleys or along nearby rivers. Late-period burials reflect this inward focus. Exotic goods became rare, replaced by simpler objects. Communities adapted, preserving ritual, storytelling, and cultural identity within narrower circles, sustaining meaning and continuity despite diminished networks. Even amid contraction, beauty endured. Local pottery maintained careful designs. Basketry continued with patience and skill. Small markets, family gatherings, and regional ceremonies persisted. Songs continued to echo through valleys and along rivers, carrying memory, humor, and instruction. Children learned local craft and song, absorbing lessons that ensured cultural continuity. Networks may have narrowed, but the threads of culture, trust, and knowledge remained intact. Some historians hesitate to call this decline at all, preferring to see it as transformation. Societies adapted to environmental pressures, shifting priorities, and evolving social needs. Outward exchanges diminished, but local practices and meanings persisted. Trade networks may have contracted, but they were never entirely erased. Communities survived, preserving memory and ritual within the rhythms of their daily lives. Even as material trade waned, symbolic motifs continued to travel, if only faintly. Spirals, birds, and other images appear on later pottery, shell, and stone, faint echoes of long-distance networks. Their presence demonstrates that ideas could drift across space, even when goods did not. Cultural memory persisted, bridging regions through symbolic language, even as physical exchange contracted. Night deepens over the river and forest. You hear faint songs carried on the wind, fewer in number but still present. Each voice carries memory, echoes of older networks, the persistence of storytelling, humor, and ritual. These sounds fade, yet never disappear entirely, like a whispered tale that lingers after silence returns. The fire before you glows gently, like the final points of light in a marketplace at dusk. Endings rarely come abruptly. Brightness softens into glow, glow into warmth, warmth into memory. The fading networks leave not sorrow, but reflection. Connections shift with time. What was once vast becomes small, yet the small retains significance. Even quiet exchanges, held close to home, carry weight enough to endure centuries. You picture late traders moving along familiar trails, carrying fewer bundles, yet moving deliberately. Objects pass hand to hand, rituals are observed, and stories are told. Spirals and bird motifs continue to appear, faint reminders of distant connections. Even as networks contract, human creativity, cultural memory, and social bonds persist, quietly sustaining life within smaller circles. Twilight deepens. The embers glow softly before you, carrying centuries of memory. Trade, song, ritual, and symbol have shifted, narrowed, and localized, but they endure. What was once a vast network of exchange is now reflected in local trade, shared stories, and small gatherings. These quieter patterns retain significance, holding human connection, culture, and memory steady across time. Even when distant horizons fall silent, the threads of trust, artistry, and meaning continue, weaving lives together across generations. You sit once more at the edge of a quiet river, the night air cool and still. The water glimmers faintly under the moon, each ripple moving slowly, as if reluctant to leave the night behind. The gentle murmur of the current seems to carry echoes of journeys stretching across centuries, tracing paths once pressed into soil and water by countless human hands. You sense the presence of voices long since quieted, whispers of trade, conversation, and stories that traveled along these waterways, lingering in rhythm with the river's steady flow. Canoes once glided along these waters, hollowed from great tree trunks with care and skill, guided by paddlers who moved with patience and trust. The rhythmic dip of each paddle was a quiet music of motion, coordinating the journey of goods, ideas, and people across landscapes without maps, relying instead on memory, observation, and oral knowledge. Travelers navigated currents and landmarks, connecting distant settlements through networks of trade and communication that spanned forests. Plains and valleys. Each canoe carried bundles carefully arranged obsidian blades, copper ornaments, and polished shell beads. These items were more than tools or trade goods. They were vessels of meaning, carrying songs, stories, and ritual practices alongside them. Every object bore layers of significance, linking communities across distance, preserving memory, and sustaining trust. The river itself becomes a living archive, holding the quiet endurance of human connection and the passage of culture through time. The forests recall trails weaving beneath dense canopies, where hunters, gatherers, and traders moved through shaded silence. Footprints pressed into the soil remain, faint traces of countless journeys. Shells from distant coasts, carefully packed into woven pouches, reached inland, speaking of long and deliberate travel. Each object bore witness to human resilience and interconnectedness, silently marking the passage of relationships across space and time. These trails were not just pathways. They were lifelines, connecting villages, sharing ideas, and preserving memory. The plains evoked grasses whispering under the wind, stretching wide as travelers moved with bundles of turquoise, stone, and carefully wrapped goods. Even in their vast openness, the plains did not hinder movement. People walked steadily, deliberately, carrying stories, songs, and items that held both practical and symbolic value. Each step was measured, each journey a commitment to sustaining connection across great distances, ensuring that cultural knowledge traveled alongside physical objects. The deserts evoke sun-scorched paths where Pueblo traders carry bright parrot feathers, rare minerals, and vivid pigments. Despite relentless heat, shifting sand, and rugged stone, determination guided every step. These routes existed in memory more than on maps, navigated by stars, landmarks, and shared oral knowledge. Each journey left subtle traces in rhythm, gesture, and exchanged objects, forming networks of trade and ritual that endured quietly across the harsh landscape. The mountains recall valleys and ridges where mica, flint, and polished stone moved carefully within packed loads. Even steep slopes yielded to patient traders, whose persistence shaped the terrain as much as the terrain directed their paths. Objects traveled with purpose, linking distant communities across high passes and hidden valleys. Each trail conveyed meaning and beauty beyond mere utility, serving as conduits for trust, artistry, and storytelling. Marketplaces gathered these elements into vibrant, living spaces. In open clearings, soft voices mingled with the aromas of roasted corn, berries, and simmering stews. Baskets overflowed with goods, pottery gleamed, and flutes and drums wove gentle music through the air. Every exchange carried trust, kinship, and memory, while humor threaded lightly through trades, reminding all that community thrived in both connection and joy. Symbols, spirals, birds, and abstract designs recur across vast distances, revealing shared imagination that bound communities even when languages differed. These images traveled alongside traded objects, carrying identity, memory, and ritual significance. They show that trade was as much about exchanging ideas, beliefs, and cultural practices as it was about goods. In later centuries, long-distance networks faded, but human connection endured in smaller, local exchanges. Communities adapted, sustaining rituals, craftsmanship, and storytelling within more intimate circles. Burials, tools, pottery, and ornaments reflect this inward focus, preserving care, memory, and cultural continuity. Even as expansive networks contracted, recurring motifs like spirals and birds remained, faint echoes of distant ties, proving that imagination and memory transcend the movement of objects. As you sit at the river's edge, you feel these pathways, enduring not only across rivers, forests, plains, deserts, and mountains, but also within the mind. Trade becomes story, story becomes memory, and memory becomes dream. Canoes still glide in imagination, trails still wind through forests, marketplaces still hum with quiet energy, and symbols whisper across generations. Though the scale of exchange may shrink, the essence of human connection remains. Communities endure through care, shared knowledge, and creativity. Even when networks fade, the persistence of memory, imagination, and cultural practice carries the heart of community forward, linking past, present, and future in a continuum that transcends distance. The river slows, the fire softens, and your breath eases into its own rhythm. The voices of traders fade gently into silence, leaving only the memory of their steps, their songs, and their gifts carried across lands that now rest quietly beneath the stars. You picture trails glowing faintly in the dark, each one a thread of connection, weaving across earth and time. They are not gone. They drift beneath the surface of history, patient as rivers, waiting for memory to touch them once more. You hear echoes of laughter around campfires, softened by distance, softened by years. You feel the hush of marketplaces at dusk, where hands once met in quiet exchange. You sense the care of artisans shaping pottery, weaving baskets, carving spirals. Every act a gift. The networks fade, yet their essence remains. The rivers still flow, the forests still stand, the plains still open wide, the mountains still rise, the deserts still stretch beneath the sky. The paths are still there, hidden but alive, whispering gently to those who listen. And so you rest. In their quiet company, you allow the sounds of water, wind, and fire to guide you. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of the day slip away, replaced by the calm embrace of timeless journeys. Good night, and until we meet again. End of script. Thank you for listening, everyone.